They changed the locks on my childhood home. They returned my graduation announcement unopened with the words, "No longer family," written across the envelope in my mother's careful handwriting. They told the cousins I had become a stranger to them, that I had broken my father's heart in ways that could never be mended. 6 years later, my mother was on her knees in a hospital corridor, gripping the hem of my white coat like a drowning woman holding onto a piece of driftwood. My father stood behind her with tears running down his face, the same face that had looked at me like I was a stranger when I was 19, and begging him to listen. The only neurosurgeon in the county who could operate on my brother that night was me. And my mother knew it. My name is Cordelia. Most people call me Della. I'm 31 years old, and I run the neurosurgery department at Mercy West Hospital in a small city about 3 hours from where I grew up. I want to tell you what happened, because for a long time I thought I was the only person in the world this had ever happened to. The comments I've read since on stories like mine have shown me that I'm not. So maybe my telling it helps someone else find the courage to walk away from people who do not deserve them, or the wisdom to know when and how much to let them back in. I grew up in a town in southern Indiana, small enough that everyone knew everyone's business. And my family's business was that my brother was the miracle and I was the afterthought. My brother is 2 years older than me. From the time I could remember anything, our mother's whole world rotated around him like he was the sun and the rest of us were planets. He had been a colicky baby, then a sickly toddler, then a child who got headaches and stomachaches at convenient moments. By the time I was old enough to notice, the pattern was set. My brother needed protection, attention, special consideration. I needed to be quiet and not make trouble. I'm not going to pretend I was a perfect child. I was bossy, and I read too much, and I corrected adults when they were wrong about historical dates. But I was also the kid who set the table without being asked, who tutored neighborhood children in math for free, who saved her allowance for 2 years to buy our mother a real cashmere scarf for Christmas. None of that registered. What registered was my brother's mood, my brother's plans, my brother's wants. Our father was a quieter parent, but he followed our mother's lead. If she said the sky was green, his job was to agree. He worked at the regional bank as a loan officer, came home at 6 on the dot, ate whatever my mother put in front of him, and watched the local news. He was not a bad man. He was just a man who had decided long ago that peace at home mattered more than fairness, and that meant my mother's version of events was always the official one. I got into a good college on a partial scholarship and decided early that I wanted to be a doctor. My brother, by then, had started and stopped at 2 community colleges and was selling phones at a kiosk in the mall. Our mother described him as finding himself. I had started a pre-med program with a 3.9 GPA and a research position with a professor who studied traumatic brain injury. And our mother described me as always with her head in those books. The summer after my sophomore year of college is when everything came apart. I came home for a 6-week break before starting my MCAT prep program. I had saved up enough at my campus job to pay my own way through the test fees and the books, but I needed a quiet place to study, and I thought home was that place. I should have known better. The first week, my brother started disappearing for long stretches and coming home glassy-eyed. The second week, my mother's wedding ring went missing. The third week, $400 vanished from the cookie jar where our father kept cash for emergencies. I knew what was happening. I knew the way you know your own face in a mirror. My brother had been using something heavier than weed for at least a year. I had seen the change in his pupils and his weight and the way he would talk too fast about nothing, then nod off mid-sentence. I had even tried to bring it up to our mother once at Easter gently, and she had cut me off so sharply that I never tried again. When the cash went missing, my father actually said something for once. He stood in the kitchen and asked who had taken it. My brother was sitting at the table, and I was making myself a sandwich, and for a long second the only sound was the refrigerator humming. Then my brother looked up with this perfectly clear face and said, calm as anything, that he had seen me take it. He said he had walked into the kitchen the night before and watched me lift the lid off the cookie jar and put the money in my purse. He said he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to get me in trouble, But since Dad was asking, he had to be honest. I want you to understand what that moment was like, because I have replayed it in my head for years, and I still cannot fully describe it. I was holding a butter knife in my right hand and a slice of bread in my left. The kitchen smelled like the lemon dish soap my mother had used that morning, and my brother, my own brother, looked at me across the table and lied with the smooth, practiced ease of someone who has lied his whole life and gotten away with it. I was so stunned I could not speak for almost a full minute. The butter knife dropped into the sink. My father turned to look at me. My mother had come in from the living room when she heard her son's voice. The three of them stood there waiting for my response, and I could feel that my response was already irrelevant. They had already chosen which version of events to believe. I said it wasn't true. I said it wasn't true. I said I would never. I said my brother had a problem, that they all knew he had a problem, that he had been using something for months, and they were all pretending they didn't see it. I begged them to look at him. To really look. To see what I was seeing. My mother slapped me across the face. She had never hit me before in my life, not once. She slapped me hard enough that I tasted blood on the inside of my cheek, and she told me to get out of her house and not to come back until I was ready to apologize for stealing and lying and trying to destroy my brother's reputation to cover for my own sickness. My father stood there and said nothing. My brother lowered his eyes like a saint who had been forced to deliver bad news. I packed a duffel bag in 20 minutes. I drove to a rest stop on the interstate and slept in my car. I called my college roommate the next morning, and she told her parents what had happened, and her parents, who I had met exactly twice, drove 4 hours to come get me. They let me stay in their finished basement for the rest of the summer. The roommate's mother sat with me at her kitchen table the second night and told me I was going to be okay, and that I should focus on my MCAT and on building the life I wanted, because some families could not be saved. She had grown up with an alcoholic mother, and she knew, she said, what it looked like when a family closed ranks around the wrong person. I took the MCAT that fall. I scored in the 99th percentile. I applied to medical school with no parental tax returns, no parental signatures, no parental support. I got into a state school in Ohio on a full financial aid package and need-based grants. I worked weekends at a coffee shop and weeknights as a tutor for high school kids studying for their SATs. I lived in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner that smelled permanently of chemical steam, and I made my own meals, and I did not call home, because home was no longer a thing that existed for me. My mother did call twice during my first year of medical school. The first time, she left a voicemail saying my grandmother was sick, and that if I cared about anyone besides myself, I would come back and apologize. The second time, 3 months later, she left a voicemail saying she had heard from a cousin that I was telling lies about our family, and that I needed to stop, or she would have to make sure no one in the family ever spoke to me again. I saved both voicemails. I never returned the calls. My grandmother on my father's side, the one my mother said was sick, called me herself a few weeks later. She had gotten my number from the same cousin my mother had warned me about. My grandmother was 83 years old, and not the kind of woman who waded into family disputes, but she had heard my version of what had happened from a neighbor, and then she had spent some quiet weeks watching my brother during his visits, and she had come to her own conclusions. She told me she believed me. She told me she was sorry she had not seen it sooner. She told me she had set up a small account in my name with some money she had been saving, and that I should use it for whatever I needed. She made me promise to call her every month. I kept that promise for the next 8 years, until the morning she died in her sleep at 91. She was the only person from that family I let back in. Everyone else, I let go. The years that followed were hard in ways I do not think I can fully convey. Medical school is brutal even with a family rooting for you. Doing it alone, with the constant low hum of grief in the back of your mind, is something else entirely. I cried in the supply closet of my surgical rotation more times than I can count. I learned to suture by candlelight when the power went out in my apartment, during a January ice storm. I missed my white coat ceremony's family reception because I had no family to bring, and I spent that night eating a microwave burrito on my fire escape and watching the snow fall on the parking lot below. But I kept going. I matched into neurosurgery, which is one of the most competitive specialties in medicine, at a strong academic program. I survived 7 years of residency. I published research. I met my husband, who is a public defender, at a fundraiser for a free legal clinic, where I had volunteered to give a talk about traumatic brain injury and incarcerated populations. He was the second person in my entire adult life, after my grandmother, to look at me and see exactly who I was. We got married at the courthouse with 2 friends as witnesses. My grandmother sent a card and a check and her blessing. No one else from my family of origin was invited or informed. By the time I was 30, I had finished a fellowship in complex spinal and brain trauma. I took a position at Mercy West, which had been trying to build out its neurosurgery program for years, and which made me an offer I could not refuse. Within 18 months, I was running the department. I was, by any external measure, exactly what my mother had once accused me of trying to be, the kind of doctor that small regional hospitals fight to keep. I did not feel triumphant about it. I felt tired and grateful and, on most days, peaceful. I had built a life I was proud of, and I had built it without them. I had not seen my parents in more than 9 years when my brother was brought into our emergency room on a Tuesday night in late October. I want to be very careful about how I describe what happened next, because there are real medical and ethical questions involved, and the commenters on stories like this often have strong feelings, and most of those feelings are correct. A physician should not, under most circumstances, treat a close family member. There are good reasons for this rule. Emotion clouds judgment. Family dynamics complicate consent. Outcomes are worse on average when you operate on someone you love or someone you have history with. But rules have edges, and the edge that night was that a 33-year-old man had been driven by his parents into our ER after collapsing at their kitchen table with the worst headache of his life, sudden in onset, accompanied by vomiting and an inability to speak. The imaging showed a ruptured aneurysm in a location that required immediate intervention. The next nearest neurosurgery program was an hour and 40 minutes away by helicopter, and the patient was not stable enough for transport. I was the only person within reach who could give him the best chance of survival. I was called in from home. I had not been told who the patient was. I had been told there was a young adult male with a ruptured anterior communicating artery aneurysm, GCS dropping. Family in the waiting room. That is the kind of call you answer in 5 minutes. I was in my scrubs and in my car within 10. I came in to the staff entrance, scrubbed, took report from the ER attending, looked at the imaging, made my surgical plan with my chief resident. I did not look at the patient's face until I walked into the trauma bay to confirm I had consent and to do my preoperative check. Even then, I almost did not recognize him. He was 33 and he looked 50. His hair was thinning. His skin was gray. His teeth, when his mouth fell open, were the teeth of someone who had been using meth for a long time. The chart said no known drug use. The chart said the parents had been adamant. I looked at him for a long second. Then I walked into the corridor and asked the charge nurse if I could see the family. My mother was sitting in the family waiting room with her hands clasped in her lap like a woman in church. My father was standing by the window. They both turned when I came in. For a second, neither of them recognized me because I was in a surgical cap and a mask, and because 9 years is a long time and I had become a different woman. Then I pulled the mask down. My mother made a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when reality breaks open underneath them. She covered her mouth with both hands. My father took 2 steps toward me and then stopped, because he did not know if he was allowed to come closer. I told them, in the flat clinical voice I have used 1,000 times to tell families things they do not want to hear, that I was the attending neurosurgeon on call, that their son had a ruptured cerebral aneurysm, that the chance of mortality without surgery in the next hour was extremely high, and that the chance of mortality even with surgery was not low. I told them what the surgery involved. I told them what the risks were. I told them I needed their consent to proceed, since the patient was unable to give it himself. My mother dropped to her knees. She did not faint. She lowered herself, deliberately, the way a person lowers themselves onto a kneeler at an altar. She put her hands on my coat and she said, "Please." She said please over and over. She said she knew she had no right. She said she knew what she had no right. She said she knew what she had done. She said please. My father stood there crying. He said my name. He said, "Della, please, he's your brother." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, and I am going to try to be honest, because I think honesty is the only thing this story is worth. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel any of the things I had imagined I might feel during all those nights in my studio apartment, when I had let myself, just for a moment, picture this exact scene. What I felt was tired. What I felt was a wave of grief, so old and so heavy that it almost knocked me down with them. And underneath the grief, I felt clarity. Sharper than I had ever felt it. I told them I was going to operate on their son, because that was my job, and because no other surgeon was available in time, and because I had taken an oath that did not have an exception for people who had hurt me. I told them I would do my absolute best work, the same work I would do for any patient who came through those doors. I told them that I would speak to them again when the surgery was over, and then I told them that what was happening in that hallway, the kneeling and the apologies, was not going to be the version of our reconciliation. If they wanted to talk about the rest of our lives, we would do it later, in daylight, with words, with my husband present, and with their full understanding that an apology made in a hospital corridor under duress was not an apology, it was a bargain. I was not interested in bargains. Then I went and operated on my brother for 6.5 hours. I will spare you the details of the surgery. It went as well as that kind of surgery can go. The aneurysm was clipped. The bleeding was controlled. The brain was not, as far as we could tell on intraoperative imaging, catastrophically damaged. He was moved to the neural ICU and intubated and monitored. And by the 3rd day, he was opening his eyes and following commands. By the 2nd week, he was speaking in short sentences. By the 5th week, he was walking with a walker. By the 3rd month, he was in a residential rehabilitation program where, for the first time in his adult life, his drug use was actually being addressed. The hospital's ethics committee reviewed the case. I had documented every step. I had called in a second surgeon for consultation by phone before I scrubbed in. I had been transparent with the team about my relationship to the patient before the case started. The committee found that my actions had been clinically appropriate given the emergency and the lack of alternative providers. They also gently noted what I already knew, which was that I should never do something like that again, and I told them they did not need to worry. My brother does not remember the surgery. He woke up 2 days later and asked the nurse where he was. The nurse told him he had been operated on by Dr. Cordelia, and he asked her to repeat the name, and then he cried for a long time, and after that he asked to see me. I did not go right away. I let 2 days pass. I let my husband sit with me at our kitchen table while I decided what I wanted to say. And then I went, in regular clothes, not in scrubs, because I did not want there to be any confusion about who was in the room. I was not visiting him as his doctor. The doctor part was over. I told my brother that I had not done the surgery for him. I had done it because someone had needed help, and I was the person who could provide it. I told him that I knew, now from his medical workup and from what my parents had finally been forced to admit, that he had been using meth for almost 15 years, and that he had been stealing from our parents for most of that time, and that the lie he had told about me at 19 had not been the only one, just the one that had stuck. I told him I forgave him for what he had done to me, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved to put it down. I told him that forgiveness was not a relationship. I told him I did not want him in my life, that I would not be at his recovery milestones, that I would not be his sister in any functional sense. I told him I hoped he got better, and that I would think of him kindly from a distance, and that was all I was able to offer. He did not argue. He nodded. He said he was sorry. He said it was the first thing he had said sober in longer than he could remember. I believed him, and it did not change what I had decided. My parents I dealt with separately, 3 weeks later at a coffee shop near my hospital. I let them buy me coffee. I let them say their apologies. My mother had written hers out on 3 sheets of yellow legal paper, and she read it to me with her hands shaking. My father said his much shorter, and he cried through most of it. They asked if there was any way I could ever forgive them. I told them the truth, which was that I had already forgiven them, but that forgiveness and access were not the same thing. I told them I would be willing to see them, with my husband present, 3 or 4 times a year on neutral ground for short visits. I told them I would call my mother on her birthday and on Mother's Day and on Christmas. I told them my father could call me on Sundays if he wanted to, between 2 and 3 in the afternoon. I told them they would never be in my home and I would not be in theirs, until I had decided otherwise, and that decision might take years, and it might never come. I told them that if they accepted these terms, I would honor them. If they violated them, even once, I would disappear from their lives again, and this time it would be permanent. They accepted. It has been almost 2 years since that night in the hospital. My brother has been sober for 19 months. He works as a maintenance man at the rehab facility that saved his life, and from what my parents tell me on our quarterly visits, he is finally becoming a person they recognize. I have not seen him again. I do not have plans to. My grandmother died last winter, peacefully, and I gave her eulogy, and my parents sat in the back of the church and did not approach me afterward, because I had asked them not to. My husband and I are expecting our first child, a daughter, in the spring. I have not yet decided what I will tell her about my family. I think I will tell her the truth, in pieces, as she is old enough to hear them. I think I will tell her that love does not have to be unconditional to be real, and that family is not a permission slip to hurt people, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is build a smaller life, on your own terms, with the people who actually see you. I want to say one more thing, for anyone who is in the early part of this kind of story, the part where the door has just closed and you are sitting in your car in a rest stop parking lot with a duffel bag and no idea what comes next. I know how scared you are. I know how alone you feel. I know that part of you is wondering if maybe they were right. If maybe you really are the problem. If maybe you should go back and apologize for things you did not do just so the silence will end. Do not go back. Build the life. Take the test. Apply to the program. Move to the city. Marry the good person. Become the doctor or the lawyer or the teacher or the carpenter or whatever it is you were going to be before they told you that you were nothing. The years are going to pass either way. You can spend them begging people who do not love you to change their minds, or you can spend them becoming someone whose mind cannot be changed by anyone but you. And if one day life puts them on a gurney in front of you, and they realize, for the first time, who you actually are, you will know what to do. You will do your work. You will save what can be saved. And then you will walk out of that hospital corridor and go home to the life you built without them, and you will understand finally that you were never the one who lost a family. They were. When I look back on the years between that summer kitchen and that hospital corridor, I see one thing more clearly than anything else. Every door that closed behind me was a door that taught me how to build my own. My mother slapping me across the face was the moment my real education began. Not the medical school years, not the residency, not even the fellowship. It was the moment I understood that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes choose the comfortable lie over the inconvenient truth. And when they do, the only thing you can save is yourself. I am not going to tell you that what my parents did was part of some grand design. I do not believe that. What I believe is simpler and harder. Actions have consequences. My brother chose to lie because he had been getting away with smaller lies for years. My parents chose to believe him because believing him was easier than admitting their golden child was sick. I chose to leave because staying would have meant agreeing that I was the problem. And 9 years later, all of those choices came due at the same time, in the same hospital, under fluorescent lights that did not flatter anyone. I want you to understand something about strength. Strength is not the loud thing. It is not the comeback line in the hallway or the satisfying speech you rehearse in your car for years. Strength is getting up at 4 in the morning to study when no one is watching. It is paying your own tuition with tip money. It is sitting at a kitchen table with a stranger's mother who treats you like a daughter for one summer and lets that be enough to carry you for a decade. It is choosing your work over your wound, again and again, until the work becomes a life. And I want you to understand something about intelligence. The smartest thing I ever did was not getting into medical school. It was knowing at 19 that I could not argue someone into loving me. You cannot debate your way back into a family that has already decided you are disposable. The smart move is to stop trying to win the argument and start building the life that makes the argument irrelevant. The hardest part for me, even now, is the part about character. Because character is what you do when no one would blame you for doing the opposite. When my mother knelt in that corridor, no one would have blamed me for walking past her. When my brother woke up, no one would have blamed me for refusing to see him. I chose differently, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I had spent 9 years becoming someone I respected. I was not going to spend the 10th becoming someone I did not. If you are reading this in your car at a rest stop tonight, with a duffel bag in the passenger seat and no idea where you are going, please hear me. The life you are about to build is going to be smaller than the one you imagined as a child, and better than the one they tried to write for you. Walk forward, do the work, become the person they failed to see. The years will pass either way. Spend them building something they will one day need permission to enter.